Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I think you might be better introducing this guest today since you met them and got them on the show. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's, with my airline job, you just, you never know who you're going to fly with. And so I was flying, actually my last trip on the 767 just about a month ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago, flying down to Santiago. And we have a crew of 3 pilots on that flight since it's longer than 8 hours. And, basically one pilot is taking a break most of the time. So there's 2 of you always up there, and, you get to know the other guys. Now, I happen to have flown with the other pilot quite a few times, so we sort of knew each other. But our guest, I had never met him, and so we sat in the flight deck together and talked for a little while, and we talked a little bit about general aviation stuff, but when we got to Chile, the other pilot came up to me and he said, he said, "Do you know who Kevin is?" And I said, "Well, yeah, he's Kevin." He goes, "He's a bleeping astronaut." And I said, "An astronaut?" He goes, "Yeah, Google him." And so we're standing outside the bus down in Chile, and I'm Googling, and it ends up that I'm flying with an astronaut. And so I went up to him. I says, "Kevin, you didn't tell me you were an astronaut." And he kind of said, "Well, that's just not something that normally comes up in conversation." I said, "Well, on the way back to Houston tomorrow night, we're doing lots of talking because I just want to talk to you. As a kid growing up in the 60s and in the 70s, I mean, there was not, I'm telling you, there's not a young man, a little boy on the planet who didn't want to be an astronaut. And here I am flying with one." So with that, we want to introduce our guest, Kevin Ford.
Hey, well, thank you. Thanks for that. Well, it's kind of funny when I climb on the flight deck with you guys, especially guys flying long haul in the big jet and stuff. Every time I fly, I learn something from what's going on in the cockpit. So even though I am a former astronaut right now, I'm a junior Birdman airline pilot. So, and I appreciate you guys showing me things and being mentors on the flight deck there, because as you know, in aviation, man, there's just something to learn around every corner and in every airframe and every aspect of flying. So that's one of the reasons I am an airline pilot. I'm 61 already. So I kind of had a fighter pilot career, if you will. I had a test pilot career, and then I had an astronaut career. All lasted about 15 years each. And here I am. I've only got about 4 or 5 years left, maybe 6 to fly with the airlines. And I did it mostly because I want to learn about what it's like and how it all works. And I enjoy it more than anything else. So it was great to be on the flight deck with you guys and seeing how to get to Santiago and back. So thanks. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with me, and anything you guys want to know about flying on rockets, maybe I can help you with that too.
Well, that's what we want to hear about. So why don't you start by just telling us about your career, how you got started, how you went from being a kid riding his bicycle around to commanding the space shuttle.
Yeah, I had an awesome Schwinn fastback when I was a kid. Used to deliver papers on it. So, but just to start out, don't Google me. Google somebody else, some other space flyers and stuff. It's not all that exciting about Kevin Ford, but I did get to fly the shuttle once in 2009 as kind of the first officer. I was called the pilot, but flew with a more senior astronaut who had flown 3 times already before. So he was the commander, flew in the left seat, and me in the right. So that was a 2-week flight, and then I flew a few years after that. After the shuttles had retired, I flew a long duration flight in the space station up and back on a Russian Soyuz. And that was about a 5-month, just shy of a 5-month flight. So that's kind of, that was the NASA career. And what got me there was, just the career in aviation in general. I never would have imagined, didn't even kind of dream of actually being able to fly in space when I was a kid. I grew up in Indiana, and I delivered papers, and I worked at a grocery store. But the guy who owned my grocery store was a pilot, owned a Tri-Pacer, and my oldest brother had his pilot's license, 11 years older than me, and took me flying when I was about 14. And just about the same time, read a book by a guy named Michael Collins called Carrying the Fire. And he was an astronaut on Apollo 11. He was the third guy besides Aldrin and Armstrong. But he's also a test pilot, and he'd been an Air Force pilot and fighter pilot, and had been through the test pilot school at Edwards. And that fascinated me very much. And thought, well, I'm just going to do a career in aviation. Whether I'm an engineer or a pilot, I just loved airplanes. So I flew the U control with the strings, and I built some radio control models when I was a kid, and I launched the Estes rockets, like so many of us do, because I love to see things fly through the air. So, and when I was then in high school, I got a job at this grocery store, and like I said, the owner was a pilot, and he asked me what I was going to do with my money. I said, well, I think I'm going to take flying lessons. And he goes, okay, well, in that case, you got the job. You can be a sack boy, and you can cut meat and so forth. So, and he always stood behind in the grocery store with me. He'd come find me and ask me, what I was learning to do about flying and everything, and really got me off to a great start. So I got my private license while I was still in high school, and then signed up for ROTC. And later managed to go through 4 years of ROTC while I was at university, and then off to pilot training for the Air Force in Mississippi. And got a assignment there to fly F-15s afterwards. There's a few steps along the way in training to kind of learn the basics of the new airplane you're going to fly, also to just get some fighter fundamentals and T-38s out of Holloman Air Force Base and so forth. But started in Germany, so I flew F-15s in Germany, and then I flew a couple more years of F-15s in Iceland out of Keflavik. And both those bases, Bitburg and then Keflavik, I think both of those are inactive now, unfortunately. So, and then became a test pilot and flew the F-16 as a test pilot in Florida and back in California again. And test pilots tended to be good candidates for being space shuttle pilots. So whether it was any branch of service, really, a lot of different people applied. And fortunately, the numbers of qualified pilots is probably just a few hundred that apply each time. Whereas for the other positions as astronaut, there are thousands and thousands. So I was lucky not to have too many pilots who were competitors for that. Applied several times to be a space shuttle pilot. I applied starting in the mid 80s in the mid 90s, and got a couple rejection letters. I still have those at home in my folder, and said, go off and find yourself something else to do. But then applied one last time in 2000 and was picked up to be a space shuttle pilot. So that's kind of how I got there. Never kind of thought I really could. Wasn't surprised when I got rejection letters, and was very surprised though when I finally got offered the job. Joined a class of about 17 folks at NASA Johnson Space Center in 2000. 7 of us were pilots, and 10 were of other occupations. Maybe we had a submariner, an oceanographer, and several engineers, and some helicopter pilots, I think, and a couple doctors and so forth in the class. And we came in 2000. None of us flew before the Columbia accident, so it was some substantial delay in us getting to space. I didn't fly then until 2009. So from 2000 to 2009, and I was a simulator pilot. So we could talk about that a lot if you want to in just a little bit. But then finally got to space in 2009. So I'll take a breather there. Let you guys see if there's anything interested in that, or if you want to start talking about how to fly rockets.
No, very interested. I got a million little things in my head that I want to talk about. I don't know if Wikipedia is ever right, but that's the only source that I had. But before this call, I'm curious, is it 157 days that you were in space?
Yeah, that was the second time, 157 days. Launched October 21st, I think, and then came home kind of middle of March of 2013. So yeah, 157 days.
That's a lot of flight time, I guess.
A third of it, maybe a quarter of it was sleeping. I didn't sleep as much in space, but remember, a quarter of that time I was earning money sleeping.
There you go. And probably I think I mentioned this before we actually started recording. When I knew a person that was up there for a while, and it was so fascinating. Every time the space station would go over, I'd watch it go over, and it's obviously looks like a fast moving star from Earth, but amazing stuff that happens up there for sure. What do astronauts do for the other 3/4 of your time when you're not sleeping?
Yeah, it's a busy place, actually. There's always a laundry list of things that they need to get done, things that are maybe broken or faulty, or filters that need changed, or some lost item that needs found, or mostly we like to say it's science that needs to be done. So years in advance of us flying up there, scientists from various universities, hospitals, physics labs, astronautical research facilities and stuff, think of things that we should test either in the space environment or like in microgravity. So we say microgravity, we really mean zero G. It's as if there's no gravity vector whatsoever. So those experiments then all have to be designed, built, and launched to get up there. And they're all stored in various places in space station. And, if everything's functioning well and it's time for somebody to do science, you go pull maybe something the size of 2 or 3 bread boxes out of a locker, and you take all the stuff out and you set it up and you do some science. So we had some fish up there when I was up there. Did a lot of fire experiments. The way bodies and biology works in space, it turns out is very different, surprisingly. Even at like the very small cell level, even cells respond differently to 0G than they do to 1G. And something like fish and stuff, they grow bones differently, fire burns differently, and so forth. So it's really all about science, but it takes about a third of our time to maintain the space station, to keep everything working, for us to live safely there, and so forth. So oxygen generation, carbon dioxide removal, water purification, all those things, urine processing, all has to be working right, just to get through the day. So.
Well, I think when Wally sent me a video, I guess he found when he was flying with you. I think you gave a Thanksgiving Day address or something like that. And I saw an experiment, right? You know how YouTube works. There was an experiment right below. It was of a gyro. And I was really shocked at how much it made me realize what rigidity in space means when the gyro wasn't spinning, and then the gentleman spun the gyro, probably talking to some kids at school. But I was impressed with how much more a gyro meant to me as a 400-hour pilot. Once I saw one in space, it was all those little science experiments do help all of us down here on Earth for sure, no question. So you mentioned that before we started recording that you were a CFI and you maintained that this whole time, and I think you were an instructor in the Air Force. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was an instructor as a test pilot. I never was like the type of instructor where you had to fly with somebody that was really going to terrify you,
There you go.
But I did solo out my son in a Piper Archer, and a few friends I took to their private rating, and I give some flight reviews. It used to be biannual flight reviews, as an instructor, and I instructed in gliders at Tehachapi, which is near Air Force Base, and we use those gliders to teach student test pilots. So test pilot students all have 1,000 hours of pilot and command time in jets before they even come to us. So when you crawl in the back seat of an F-16 or an F-15 or a glider with one of those guys, they're already experienced aviators, but you're trying to show them some things they've never seen before. So some things can be somewhat uncomfortable. We used to, for example, roll the F-16 upside down, push to negative two Gs, and do a full lateral stick. So even at pretty high speed, and when you're hanging from your straps upside down at 2 Gs, and then you put in full lateral stick, it can be a pretty wild ride. So, and the students didn't always, most of the time they put the stick input in and they let go immediately because they're like, well, isn't that dangerous?
Yeah, I don't want any part of that for sure.
I don't want any part of this, really. I don't want to break anything. Is this really what we're supposed to be doing? You're like, yeah, keep trying. You'll get it. You'll get the data sooner or later. So that's what you're teaching. And we used to teach flying qualities and gliders and so forth. So it's a different kind of instructing than probably a lot of your, behind the prop that the people are used to. But nevertheless, you still trying to get an idea across, and you do a demo for them, and then try to talk them through the errors, but a little bit different category of instructing maybe.
Well, I think I was complaining about unusual attitudes like 2 weeks ago, so I have a feeling that's a lot worse than unusual attitudes for sure.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the simulator. It sounds interesting. What was being a simulator pilot for 9 years on the space shuttle like? I think I landed it once on Flight Simulator many years ago.
When people say, what did you do for all those years? I go, well, thousands and thousands of hours of simulator time. And that's really not an exaggeration. I probably, would on average do a 7-hour sim every week that was like an orbit sim where you're already in space, like in the space shuttle, and things are going kind of crazy. Maybe like a lot of more advanced airplanes, we had inertial measurement units or initial reference units, so that we knew what our attitude was relative to the stars. And the sim team would make those dump, so we'd have to realign them, do a manual realignment or something like this, or we maybe have a leak in one of our liquid hydrogen or liquid oxygen tanks, and we'd have to deal with isolating that leak perhaps. Or occasionally we'd end up with an emergency where you have to deorbit quickly, let's say to Istres, France or something like that. Maybe you're leaking your deorbiting prop. So you need a certain amount of propellant to come home from space. So if those happen to start leaking, or the pressurization unit that pressurizes them, then it can call for an emergency deorbit scenario. So a lot of times they would end up like that. So I would do a 7-hour sim like that once a week. And then we did these ascent and entry sims as well, where we flew off the launch pad, maybe abort back to the Kennedy Space Center. We maybe abort to to Spain, Zaragoza, or some other country. That was always cool because from launch to landing in Spain was 35 minutes.
Wow.
Secretly, all the pilots kind of thought, if anything is going to go wrong in this flight, it sure would be neat if it was a transoceanic abort landing, because I will forever be in the history books for the fastest flight from U.S. to Europe. But we didn't want to have an abort, of course, and we never ended up in 135 flights. We didn't see a real abort situation, but could have easily happened with just like one engine failure, after you've launched or something like that. You really needed all 3 shuttle engines and both solid rocket boosters off the launch pad to get you to space. So you could do things to stay alive, but probably not to complete the mission with an engine failure on a space shuttle. So yeah, so we did those were 4-hour blocks of sims, and I would do one of those a week or two, and then we do single systems simulators as well, where you're just working with maybe the communication system, or you're just working with the flight control system or the computer system, something like that, where you're just looking at specific types of failures. So a lot of simulations. And then we did have, I think I might have mentioned this to Wally, we had this Gulfstream that simulated space shuttle approaches. And we flew most of those out in New Mexico to the White Sands landing facility, because we needed to come from high altitude and come through a lot of vertical airspace kind of quick. The class B in Houston they weren't willing to let us do those space shuttle approaches into Ellington Field, unfortunately. So we occasionally did them in Florida to the Cape, sometimes at Edwards Air Force Base, because those are the 2 prime landing sites. And then we practiced most of them at White Sands out in, we took out from El Paso Airport and would fly up north, maybe 70, 80 miles up to the White Sands range and do 10 airborne simulations, fly into the runways there. And this Gulfstream had the ability to deploy the thrust reversers in flight and allow us to fly this really steep profile that the shuttle had. The shuttle didn't have any engines, but it was very draggy. So, and it was actually much lighter weight than most people would think. So it's big, it's white, very draggy. And when it comes home, pretty light, relatively speaking. So it had about a 20-degree glide path coming down to the runway, just to keep a steady speed. So it was pretty steep, and this Gulfstream could simulate that. And a shuttle commander prior to his first landing had to have done that 1,000 times.
Wow.
It was as assignable as the commander. The right seater had to do 500. I ended up with about 780 of them, I think, before I flew my shuttle flight. So
700 of these landings in this Gulfstream that was designed for this. Wow. Well, I guess that makes the saying practice makes perfect pretty realistic then, for sure.
I don't think Willie got to see me land, but he is like, wow, you did 700 landings at a shuttle, and that's the way you fly a 767? Come on.
No. So, Kevin, so tell us, I mean, what is going through your mind when you're sitting on the launch pad on the space shuttle and the countdown is going on? I mean, I just can't imagine. I can't imagine the adrenaline going through your body. I mean, do you want to pee all over yourself? Are you excited, or you're scared, or a combination of all of the above, or what?
You got a diaper on, so if you want to pee all over yourself, that's okay. We suit up, like hours before we go out to the launch pad, and then you're climbing in an hour and a half prior. So it's a long time. So in that suit, but anyway, I was glad as a pilot in the right side, you're actually pretty busy. There are things you test and things you start the APUs. We have hydrazine APUs to power the rocket nozzles and the flight controls on ascent, and those things are all powered up. So we're kind of busy right up until launch, and that takes your mind a little bit off of, your fate, if you will, and what's meant for you tonight. We did do one abort launch before we went all the way to 15 minutes on I think it was the 24th of August. At 2:40 in the morning, and thunderstorms rolled in. I mean, it was a night that looked like it was going to be fine. And a guy behind me said, "Man, I think I saw lightning out there." And I said, "Nah, Pat, that was a bunch of moths flying through the xenon lights. It just looked like lightning." And then he goes, "I think that's rain on the windscreen right there." And I said, "No, Pat, that's just moisture." Coming off the tank, it's got oxygen in it. So, but I knew he was right. And then it just let loose and just poured down. And after that, I thought, man, I don't know, we got a lot of water soaked into that, that foam covered tank. Do we really want to launch tonight? But they called it off. We all climbed out, went back to crew quarters, had steak at 4:00 in the morning, and it was about 4 more days before we actually launched. So we'd been all the way to a 15-minute point, thinking we were going to launch when they took us back in that first time. The second time, what is a pilot thinking about? I'm thinking about like not messing anything up, because if I throw the wrong switch at the wrong time, there's maybe 500,000 to 1 million spectators that drove to the Cape to watch the launch, and they're all going to read about it in the paper the next day. But Kevin Ford threw the wrong switch, and the launch got scrubbed. So I just trying to, think about what's next, like any pilot. I had an instructor once ask me, he said, "Hey, what are the 2 most important things in aviation?" And his answer was, "The next 2 things." Whatever you're doing, it's those next 2 things. And I thought that was really good. And so that's what we focus on as the pilots. Now, we do have some guys sitting down on the mid deck who are kind of don't have any windows. They just have lockers, and they're just sitting down there waiting for whatever fate befalls us that evening. But I was pretty busy. I did watch the attitude indicator as we left the launch pad to make sure we were going straight up, because pilots, we think of everything. We kind of think, well, what would it be like if one solid rocket booster lit and the other one didn't? Well, you're going to go really sideways in a real hurry. So, and the truth is, there's a range control officer, an Air Force major, so not even a very high-ranking guy, who has the ability to unzip those solid rocket boosters and stop the thrust immediately. So you want to make sure you're going straight off the launch pad. You go up for just a few seconds and then you start rolling. You roll and you point your tail towards Massachusetts, actually, to go to the space station. So you come off the launch pad, you roll your tail, you do a right roll to, we call it heads down, but at that point you're still kind of going straight up. And then you head off toward Massachusetts and you fly out upside down for a good long time. So out the right window of the space shuttle, you can see the East Coast of the United States and everything. We went through a cloud deck at 15,000 and another cloud deck at 40,000. And I'm telling you, it really, you see it coming, because the solid rocket boosters have turned everything into daylight. And you see those clouds coming at you, at about Mach 1.5, and it's a pretty spectacular thing to see. So you get up and you go fast. It's about an 8.5 minute ride. You end up just off Cape Cod, and that's where all the engines shut down, and you're going fast enough to stay above the atmosphere all the way over to about Saudi Arabia. At which point you do another burn to make sure the whole orbit stays above the atmosphere, and you're in orbit, headed to space station.
I have no words. I think that, and what can you say?
Well, I have a question, because there's all these guys. Well, not all these guys. These multi-billionaires who are launching their own rockets nowadays keep talking about going into space. What's your opinion? I've read the math and the how far away you're supposed to be, but are these guys actually getting into space, or are they just jumping up a little higher than most?
So the suborbital guys are getting into space for sure. They're just not able to stay there very long. So if you just go up to high altitude, you definitely leave the atmosphere. What actually keeps you in orbit, though, is this horizontal speed. So you need to be doing about 5 miles a second parallel to the surface of the Earth. And that way, as the Earth curves away from you, gravity is still working on you. So it's making you turn, but the Earth's surface curves away from you just as fast as your flight path is curving downward. So so they're really going to space, and they're getting about 4 minutes or so, I guess, of zero G time. And I'm sure, it's a very moving experience for them. I feel bad for them that they can't stay a little longer and see, something besides the state that's below them and everything. But that, it hasn't been that long ago that this was like just really an incredible thing to do, to get up to that altitude and get down safely. And so far, they seem like the machines have been behaving and reliable. I watch those things with a little bit of nervous energy, because I don't want anybody to get hurt or anything like that. And as a NASA guy, we had the ability to kind of say, you know what, we don't like this or that. We really should fix it. And there was somebody, we didn't have to worry about it being a business decision per se. Well, the company will go broke if we do that. We just say, if this is what it takes, then this is what we'll do to be safe. And so as a business model, and I haven't worked in that world, so I can't tell, if it's well received and stuff, when the operators and stuff say, we really need some more redundancy for this, or, I had trouble getting this computer rebooted, just at the worst possible time. That made me nervous or whatever. Do we need the redundancy? So hopefully nobody will get hurt. They'll continue to learn good lessons, and I hope they look through everything NASA has to offer in terms of lessons learned, and put those to good use, so that we can keep fly citizens safely and everything. As far as getting to orbit, SpaceX is getting a few people with their Falcon 9 booster and their SpaceX Crew Dragon. They're getting some people into orbit for just a few days, and it's the start of a new era, I think, in personal space travel and stuff. So sky's the limit, or the sky's not the limit, however you say that.
Yeah. I'm fascinated with Elon and SpaceX and all that stuff, so I've paid attention to it. I'm still curious, and like you, I think I watched all those launches on bated breath too, just to make sure that they're safe and no one gets hurt. As we wrap up the show, Kevin, you mentioned when we were talking before we started recording that you might have more time in front of a rocket nozzle than you do behind a prop. But this show is called Behind the Prop. So there's probably a lot of people out there listening that fly single engine piston planes today, but maybe aspire to be an astronaut one day. What kind of guidance or help or suggestions would you make to those people listening that say, hey, I want to do what Kevin did. I want to be an astronaut. What should they do?
They should they should start down the right trail. Of course, being in science or being in aviation, kind of that's what space flight is. It's an extension of that. So, I just found that to be the path of choice for me, but it interests me. And if you want to be an astronaut, there are other ways. Like I said, we have doctors and oceanographers and submariners and everything, Navy SEALs and stuff who have come to be astronauts. But I would say do most what you really love and you're interested in. And, it's everything you do isn't really just a path. Everything you do is an end in itself, whether it's flying single engine airplanes, learning to land your tail dragger better and keeping on reading about that, or picking Wally's brain, when we're flying a 767 and going, hey, why did you put that entry in the box there, right, Wally? We're always learning, from each other every step of the way. And like, I'm going to make this a hard altitude, and managing your own occupation, trying to learn as much as you can about it and being really good with it, is the most important thing. Love what you're doing, most of all, and make the best of it. If you want to keep aspiring to a different level, like I did when I went to my airline pilot training, I was like, fortunately, I was the oldest in the class. And at this company, if you're the oldest in the class, you get your first choice. And there were a couple 757, 767s on there. I was like, just give me the biggest plane you got, I know it's going to be hard for me. And it was hard for me. When I went through my airline pilot training, I worked as hard there as I ever did when I was an astronaut to become and understand how to do my job as an airline pilot. So put all the energy into what you're doing that you can, whether it's your type of airplane, whether it's the places you kind of fly, if you're a mountain pilot or something like that, float plane, just learn all you can about it, fly with other people, fly the types of equipment, and take every opportunity you can to learn from others. So I enjoyed, when I was at NASA, I enjoyed doing sims with other commanders and stuff, even though at some point I was assigned to one particular commander. And we, at that point I could say, well, you know what? I saw this technique once and can I do it this way? And fortunately I had a commander, it's actually CJ Sturkow, who flies for Virgin Galactic now. So he's flying to space on those Virgin Galactic airplanes. And like, I watched him get dropped. I don't know, maybe coming up on a year ago now. I get dropped off the mothership, and I was watching on Flight Radar 24, which you can, believe it or not, you can see their altitudes and everything. And it's like, he's just going down. I'm like, I think he's supposed to be going up here anytime. And he just had to dead stick it down to the runway. So the engine didn't light. They have since figured out what that anomaly was, and I think they're back off to the races again. But that's what he does. He does for a living now. But back to that topic is just learn what you can from everybody you can, and watch what other people do. And man, there's no end to the learning. So I've been flying now since I was 16. I started taking my flying lessons. Now I'm 61 now, and I've never stopped learning. Every flight I see somebody do something, I go, well, that's a great idea. That's really cool. Or, man, I'm going to try that myself, next time I fly into Santiago or something like that. So it's just it's a wide open field. It's a lifetime of learning, and keep after it. So
Well, that's awesome, Kevin. I really appreciate you joining the show. I know Wally does as well. As always, we tell our listeners to fly safe and normally stay behind the prop. Today, we'll say stay in front of the rocket nozzle as well. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
all right, you bet, guys.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at behindtheprop.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.